Hello, I'm Adrian Finnegan. This is Counting the Cost on Al Jazeera, your weekly look at the world of business and economics. This week, where has all the money gone? Algerians protest against the mismanagement of the economy. A deadly storm hits one of the poorest regions in the southern hemisphere. Millions need assistance as roads and buildings are washed away. Plus, the US warns Italy about what it says are China's predatory loans. What will Rome get from Beijing's Belt and Road Initiative? As Algeria's oil wealth dries up, people are demanding to know, where has all the money gone? Corruption, youth unemployment and inequality have been at the centre of protests against the two-decade rule of Algeria's President Abdelaziz Bouteflika. Despite agreeing not to stand for another term, Algerians have little faith in the business elite, military and politicians who are running the country. Well, the country's wealth has been squandered. It had currency reserves of $179 billion in December 2014, but that amount has shrunk to $79.8 billion. Rather than using the oil and gas wealth to diversify the economy, more than a fifth of the budget is used for subsidies. The International Monetary Fund says that Algeria's oil and gas revenues account for 95% of the country's export earnings and 60% of its budget. But oil prices have been falling, and the country's oil and gas production has also been in decline due to a lack of investment, meaning that there isn't the money to fill the treasury. Unemployment in Algeria is running at 11.1%, but youth unemployment stands at 26.4%. Two-thirds of the country's 41 million population are under the age of 30. Well, promises to diversify the economy haven't materialised, unlike its neighbour Morocco, which has little in the way of oil and gas. It's built an enviable auto industry, opened up the tourism industry, and is well on its way to achieving 52% of its power needs from renewables. But in Algeria, the strikes and protests go on, as Al Jazeera's Mohammed Val reports.
Anti-government protests in Algeria continue to spread. Oil and gas field workers in the far south of the country, the latest to join the outcry. Workers in Hasirmel, which is Algeria's largest gas field, are echoing calls nationwide for President Abdelaziz Bouteflika to resign. Managers of the state energy firm Sonatrach say production is unaffected. Algeria boasts the world's fifth largest reserves of natural gas. But Bouteflika's critics say after 20 years of his presidency, the energy wealth is reaching fewer Algerians than ever before. Unemployment and the cost of living are rising. And they say the political atmosphere is choking the economy due to the decades-long rule of a corrupt elite backed by Algeria's military. And the revolt has spread to expatriates in former colonial power France. They were out in force in Paris for the third consecutive Sunday.
We're tired of old people. Since 1962, we've always been with old people. Leave the place to the young. Get out of the way. The system is clear. Make way for the young.
The ailing 82-year-old President Abdelaziz Bouteflika relinquished his bid for a fifth term following weeks of unrest. But his decision to postpone the presidential election scheduled for April 18 has provoked more widespread anger. Bouteflika has appointed a new Prime Minister, Nourdine Bedoui, and a deputy, who are in talks to form a cabinet mostly of technocrats. But the Prime Minister is receiving little support from protesters who say they don't trust any politicians linked to the Bouteflika old guard. A few members of parliament, including some from the ruling FLN party, have resigned in support of the protests.
We refuse to participate in the upcoming cabinet because we believe that such cabinet should only result from a national conference and a transparent national popular dialogue. The people have taken to the streets to bring about real change and make sure that none of the same people who have been ruling us continue in power.
Even the staunchest supporters of change in Algeria seem to realize ousting the military from their influence on politics may be impossible. Instead, protesters hope for younger leaders who will be less corrupt, more democratic, and more answerable to the rule of law, even if supported by the generals as guarantors of stability.
Joining us now via Skype from Montreal, Professor Taib Hafsi. Taib is a strategy and society professor of management at the HEC in Montreal. Welcome to the programme, Professor. Should these protests in Algeria come as a surprise to anyone, given the economic hardship that Algerians are having to endure?
Well, it's not a surprise. Actually, in Algeria, there has been several revolts in the last few years. And so it's only in the capital city that nothing was happening. And so this comes as no surprise. Actually, there has been debate about whether for their independence, Algerians have been fighting for freedom or for bread, and it is clear that they have been fighting for freedom, and freedom has been suppressed.
Algeria should be a rich nation. It is geographically the biggest nation in Africa, but it's an oil and gas producer. Where has all the money gone?
Well, Algeria is rich of many things. You're right. The educational level, for example, is high, and as you mentioned, there are many resources. Oil being only one of them. The money has been very poorly used. It is highly centralized, politicized, and inefficient economic management, and also, there has been a period that has made that worse, which was a period of socialism. So you have a legacy of a state-owned and managed system, which is quite inefficient. And there is an amazing amount of waste.
Professor, half the population is under the age of 30. Job opportunities, though, are limited. Wages are low. Who should take the blame for the high rate of unemployment in Algeria? And how on earth does the country deal with the prospect that 10 million more job seekers are going to come into the market by the year 2025?
Yes, you're right. Statistics actually show that about 63% of the population is 30 or less. So it's an amazing number. And these people are coming into, if you will, as you said, into the market in throes, and the question is, will the economy be able to provide jobs for all these people? And clearly, the only economy that can do that is the private sector economy, and the private sector has been suppressed ever since the independence. This regime is, of course, to blame for that. When you're there for so long, you lose legitimacy, and to keep legitimate, then you start doing all kinds of wasteful social supports. For example, bread and energy are paid about 10% of their value. So the problem is not that you're giving away if you will, the bread and the energy. The problem is that people receiving, if you will, bread and energy at that price simply forget about the value, and then they waste it.
98% of Algeria's revenues, Professor, come from the oil and gas sector, but obviously those resources are finite. They're dwindling. The current price of oil, being as low as it is affecting exports and foreign reserves. Here in the Gulf, economies are looking to diversify away from oil and gas. Why hasn't Algeria done the same?
The problem with oil is that it has generated a rent-seeking behavior. And when I say rent-seeking behavior, it's not only the people at the very top who are rent-seeking. The bureaucracy is rent-seeking. The firms, if you will, even private firms are rent-seeking. Even the population is rent-seeking. And so you have this incredible lazy demeanor. And of course, rent-seeking leads to corruption. And so as a result, if you will, it is a real curse. When we think about trying to diversify away from oil, that means encouraging the real economy. Then you have to realize that business is a source of power. And so the government has been trying to keep it also under control. Algeria is one of the few countries in the world where you have to get permission to invest your money. No market behavior, no discipline. And so the result is no development. It's not no surprise what's happening in Algeria goes against all the norms, if you will, of economic behavior that we know about.
Professor, is there any cause for optimism over Algeria's economic future?
Of course there is. The Algerian economy is really paradoxical. I mean, I have been describing to you that it's very poorly managed and seemingly doomed. But also at the same time, you see some very thriving segments. The real economy, by the way, is mostly informal. About 60% of the economy is informal, and it is not accounted for. How do firms actually survive in this very hostile environment? There are smaller firms all over the country trying to remain below the radar, if you will, but succeeding, doing very well. And so our research on successful private firms shows that, for example, they don't rely on the state, they want to be excellent, and often they become competitive on the world market. So in a sense, there is something happening bottom up that in my opinion, is very promising.
Professor, it's been really good to talk to you. Many thanks indeed for being with us.
Thank you, Adrian. Thank you.
Now, a powerful cyclone and floods have killed hundreds of people and left a massive trail of destruction across swathes of southeastern Africa. Cyclone Idai hit Mozambique's port city of Beira before moving inland. It flattened buildings and put the lives of millions of people at risk. It then barreled west to Zimbabwe and Malawi. Al Jazeera's Famida Miller flew over one of the hardest hit areas in central Mozambique.
The roofs of buildings peep out from the muddy water. That's all that's left of this town, decimated by floodwater that almost a week ago raged through Buzi in central Mozambique's Sofala province. It's not known how many people made it out safely. Further on, stagnant water lies across the horizon. On an isolated piece of dry land, rescue workers drop off desperately needed food. Hundreds of people queue for what could be their only meal in days.
There's very little dry land. The water stretches as far as the eye can see. Rescuers are assessing the extent of the devastation. Many say they've never seen anything like it.
As we fly further, we see what was once a sports ground, now a temporary shelter for hundreds. People who are stranded sit, wait, and sleep on a battered grandstand. A short but uncertain reprieve from floodwaters. Then a call comes through to save a critically ill patient. This woman is pregnant and needs medical help as quickly as possible. A 10-minute flight between flood-ravaged Buzi and the relative safety of Beira city may be her only chance. Initial concern about how Cyclone Idai would impact central Mozambique has been replaced by worry over widespread flooding, a growing number of deaths, and the displacement of thousands of people. This is just one rescue of what aid agencies say could be thousands more.
Still to come on Counting the Cost, the plight of Venezuela's fishermen as they barter to survive. Britain's decision to join China's challenger to the World Bank drew a quick rebuke from Washington. The US claimed the Asia Infrastructure Investment Bank would extend Beijing's soft power. 3 years on, the decision by Italy's new populist government to sign up for investment from Beijing has raised concerns in Western capitals. The US National Security Council warned endorsing the Belt and Road Initiative lends legitimacy to China's predatory approach to investment and will bring no benefits to the Italian people. Those concerns are already playing out. China's largesse is entrapping vulnerable nations in debt. You may recall Sri Lanka fell behind with payments and had to hand over a vital seaport that had been built with Chinese loans on a 99-year lease. Pakistan's attempts to negotiate an IMF loan have been complicated by Washington's unwillingness for the money to be used to pay back Beijing's loans to Pakistan. And in Djibouti, where the US has a military base, China opened its first overseas base. At the same time, the country's debts have soared to 80% of GDP from 50%. In Italy's case, it has debts of 2.3 trillion euro and pays 64 billion every year in interest payments. Should it get into trouble, the European Bailout Fund would not be able to save the country. China's President Xi Jinping hopes the two countries can work together on everything from ports to telecoms and pharmaceuticals to football. Joining us now from London, Greg Swenson. Greg is the founding partner at merchant bank Brigg Macadam. Greg, always good to have you with us on Counting the Cost. So, Italy, the first G7 nation to sign up to the Belt and Road Initiative. Why should that be a problem?
Well, I think it was a little aggressive. On one hand, it's just a memorandum of understanding. It's not that big of a deal. Remember, the EU has had diplomatic ties with China since 1975. They've got 60, sectoral dialogues going on. So it's not the first time there's been any conversations between members of the EU and China. But I think it was a little aggressive in the sense that they've really annoyed the northern countries in the EU especially, and surely they're going to annoy the US by reaching out in this sort of extended fashion to China and endorsing the BRI, which again the United States and most of the EU has some issues with.
But surely, suffering its third recession in a decade, as Italy is, no one could blame them for looking for ways to steer the economy out of trouble.
Right, and that's natural, and I think that's fine that they are reaching out. Look, I think China's a great market for them, especially considering that their role in the luxury good market. But it's important to keep in mind that their first relationship should be with the EU and also with the U.S., given the membership in NATO and the membership in the G7. So, look, I think that they've gone a little overboard. Is it the end of the world? I don't think so. But I do think it's natural to want to reach out to economic partners. But the EU is the #1 market for China in terms of exports. China is the #1 market for the EU. I'm sorry, the #2 market for the EU, and notably the US is the #1 market for the EU. So I think Italy has to just do a better job of being diplomatic with their allies before reaching out or overreaching out to China. But it is quite natural to want to sell products.
So it is China's embrace a snub for the United States? I mean, Italy's also pushing back on the use of Huawei's telecoms gear, isn't it?
Right, and they should. I mean, keep in mind that Matteo Salvini, the head of the league, is being very careful not to overdo it. So some of the other leadership, notably Di Maio, is maybe reaching out a little too aggressively. There's nothing wrong with making arrangements for football teams. There's nothing wrong with making arrangements for soft products. But I think you have to draw the line at strategic things, notably ports. And then you mentioned Huawei. So I think communications are really critical here.
Do you think that this is inexperience on their part, this populist government in Italy?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, they're right out of the gates here. You've got League, you've got Five Star. One is on the left, one is on the right. I think League has probably got its eye on being better economic partners and having traditional supply side economics. And that's why I think that, Salvini is being a little more cautious, whereas Di Maio is being a little more aggressive. They're disruptive. They're taking a page out of the populist playbook and not really paying attention to diplomatic, traditional diplomatic methods. But I would also argue that they're having problems economically. There's no doubt about that. They have a significant debt problem, and their economy is very weak, and the growth is anemic. But the way to fix that isn't necessarily partnering up with authoritarian government. Better to liberate your economy. Take a page out of the U.S. playbook, and I think Salvini is really embarked on developing a relationship with President Trump. Take a page out of the Trump playbook, which was deregulate, reduce taxation, reduce the burden on the private sector, liberate your labor rules. But just embracing China and borrowing more money is not the answer. They've got enough debt. What they really have is a spending problem.
3 years ago, Britain was picking up a certain degree of flack from the US for joining China's Asia Infrastructure Investment Bank. We've not heard a lot about that of late, have we?
Right, and that's why I'm sometimes cautious about getting too excited about announcements like an MOU or embracing a new investment bank when they really haven't done much. I mean, so we'll see what happens. I hope that there's a bit of a pushback or a pullback on the part of Italy. That investment bank, when it was announced, I know was controversial. There really hasn't been much, not a lot has come of it, so I'm not that worried about it. I mean, the best thing to do is let the free markets work. If China wants to overlend in the sense that they want to expand their economic footprint, there should be lines drawn in terms of strategic interests, like communications. I think Huawei has to be dealt with, ZTE, and anything in the port business, especially in a geopolitically important place like Italy, I think there should be caution. But I think the best way to do it is let the free markets work. If China wants to overlend, they'll probably make some mistakes along the way. So I'm not that worried about it. But I do think it's a moment for the EU to embrace their strategic partners, notably the US, and really make some sort of pushback against this expansion by China, both militarily and economically. And I think that will work out, and I think that the EU and the US will win.
Greg, it's always good to talk to you on Counting the Cost. Many thanks indeed for being with us.
Great to see you, Adrian. Thanks.
Venezuela's political crisis continues as opposition leader Juan Guaido keeps up his efforts to oust President Nicolas Maduro. A collapsed economy means that many people are struggling to survive. And as Al Jazeera's Teresa Bo reports from Puerto La Cruz, desperation is leading people to barter fish for vital supplies.
This is a daily scene at Los Cocos port in the state of Anzoátegui. Fishermen arrive with their catch of sardines, which is the only fish most people can afford these days. People like Enzo Gavin spent all night at sea.
Tell the government to come and see what's happening here. This is hunger, it's desperation. I don't even make money. I only try to get food for my family.
Hyperinflation is having a devastating effect among the country's poorest.
The fish that you can see here are sardines. It's the cheapest source of protein that you can find in Venezuela these days, and that's why hundreds of people are coming here to trade it in for pasta, rice, or flour. What they tell us is that 1 kilo of sardines is worth one food item.
These days, Venezuelans struggle to find the most basic items. Medicines are difficult to find, but also food.
There's no food, there's no money. My husband works and money is worthless. Look at us. I came here to find something to take back home.
Miguel Núñez has been a fisherman all his life. It's what his family has been doing for generations. Now, for the first time in his life, he's thinking of leaving the country.
I already got myself and my family a passport. 3 of my children already left. If I go somewhere, there has to be somewhere I can fish because it's the only thing I know how to do.
Miguel has only 1 engine left, and the government has stopped giving credits to people like him years ago. Engines are crucial because fishermen like him mostly work in the islands close by, where they set up their base camp and monitor the tides of the Caribbean Sea. A place where the situation has deteriorated in the past years.
Just like almost everybody else, fishermen are also struggling with the current economic crisis in Venezuela. And because of that crisis, insecurity has become a major issue. Most of the fishermen we have spoken to say that they have been robbed by thieves that are operating all around this area.
Most of them are former fishermen, turned into smugglers. Javier Rodriguez was robbed a few days ago.
There are pirates and the government detains them and then releases them. They are armed, and if there are 5 of them are armed. The boat I work with was stolen. I am without a boat and without work.
Venezuela once had one of the most thriving fishing industries in the region. When Hugo Chavez came to power, he nationalized companies and ports. He also wanted to prioritize artisanal fishing. But things did not go as planned.
The government expropriated companies and gave them to cooperatives with no experience. There's no knowledge on how to handle these companies. When the equipment starts failing, then nobody knows how to solve it. Initially the idea was good, but look where we are today. Many of them are not even working.
In Venezuela, people can no longer depend on their wages as the economic crisis makes it difficult to eat every day. It's a struggle for survival that people say the government has chosen to ignore.
And that's our show for this week. If you'd like to comment on anything you've seen, you can tweet me. I'm at @Finnegan on Twitter. Use the hashtag AJCTC when you do, or you can drop us a line. Counting the cost at aljazeera.net is our email address. As always, there's more for you online at aljazeera.com/CTC. That address takes you straight to our page, and there you'll find individual reports, links, even entire episodes for you to catch up on. But that's it for this edition of Counting the Cost. I'm Adrian Finnegan. From the whole team here in Doha, thanks for being with us. The news on Al Jazeera is next.